Hello, welcome back. This is going to be very brief and quite simple. In these slides, we are going to review some of the main pieces of sports nutrition. None of this is groundbreaking information, but it does highlight the most fundamental principles of how to incorporate nutrition into exercise or athletic performance. So first, let's go over the macronutrients. We wanted to look at the effect of nutrients on exercise and athletic performance. To do this, we started by going over the effect of the macronutrients, the carbohydrates, the fats, and proteins on exercise, and then from there we discussed the effect of the micronutrients. The macros are responsible for providing our body with energy and with tissue, like we discussed on the last slide. Energy is provided from carbohydrates and fats, carbohydrates for higher intensity physical activity and fats for lower intensity activity. Protein can indirectly provide fuel for muscle tissue, and it does this by actually building up muscle tissue, which we can do through exercise that breaks down and works this tissue. But in doing so, what we're trying to do is get larger muscles so that our muscles can store greater amounts of ATP, and it's the ATP that actually provides the energy, not the body protein or dietary protein. It might, but that's only in severe cases, and it's not good, so it's important to remember that. Excess intake of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins will also convert into tissue through body fat. So anytime we get too much of any of these nutrients, it turns into fat. And these are roles that are unique to macronutrients and not performed in any capacity by any of the micros. There's a great deal of nutrition information that's available to us through a variety of sources. Some of them are unfortunately less reputable than others. However, you should know by now that all macronutrients play essential roles in human physiology, and that we should not cut out any of them. Now, with that said, a case can be made for cutting out carbohydrates if we're following the ketogenic diet, but we must remember that the ketogenic diet is not effective for any time other than a period of prolonged light exercise, and certainly not during a period of heavy training, intense exercise, or athletic competition. Carbohydrates provide us with energy, and an adequate intake of carbohydrates is also going to spare the breakdown of muscle tissue, except in the case of ketosis. Protein mainly promotes muscle growth and repair, and it also helps us to feel full and to curb appetite. And then adequate dietary fat and body fat will help keep our hormonal balance intact, give us optimal levels of motivation, provide us with energy for endurance-based exercise, and play a number of other essential roles in our health. Next up, we have the micros. Micronutrients are needed in smaller quantities, and as we know now, the term micro is related to the amount of which these nutrients are needed. We need less micronutrients than we do macronutrients. They play essential roles, but we just need them in lesser quantities. And the micronutrients include two categories. These are the vitamins and the minerals. The role of minerals in sports nutrition is largely centered on one, playing a role in fluid balance or as an electrolyte, two, supporting bone structure, which is crucial for all activities, especially those involving high impact activities, and three, iron, which transports oxygen to the muscles. For the vitamins, we are really simplifying things on this slide, but some of the most important takeaways are that vitamin D promotes bone strength by assisting calcium metabolism. However, that is not its only role. Vitamin D also promotes hormonal regulation and hormonal balance. It is one nutrient that should be supplemented by the majority of people worldwide, that do not live close to the equator or who are not regularly exposed to sunlight. So people in Charleston, Illinois, between the months of October and March should probably be getting vitamin D through supplement form. The B vitamins, especially vitamin B12, play a major role in providing us with energy by assisting macronutrient metabolism. Other vitamins that play a role in exercise are vitamins A, C, and E, the antioxidants, and they generally perform their function by neutralizing free radicals and therefore decreasing muscle soreness, although the utility of this function is debated. There are a variety of other vitamins and minerals that play roles essential to exercise and activity, but if you understand the function of these vitamins and minerals that we discussed here, you have a strong base understanding of vitamins and minerals as a whole, as they most importantly relate to sports nutrition. Macronutrients and micronutrients are definitely separate entities, but they can actually work together. And breaking up these two concepts and explaining them individually can better show how macros and micros do work better together. The actual amount of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that a person should get are going to vary significantly from athlete to athlete or individual to individual, especially when comparing different sports and different sexes. However, almost all athletes can benefit from a proportion of their meals that is comparable to what we will find in my plate. Ensuring that we get this approximate proportion of each of these food groups, we're going to increase our chances for having optimal energy during and recovery from exercise. To ensure optimal micronutrient intake, we simply fill in each of these food groups with unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods such as whole grains, unfried meats, fruits, vegetables, and starchy vegetables. It's ideal to get a variety of each of these foods to help ensure also that we get all of the vitamins and minerals that we need. And by getting both good sources of micronutrients and macronutrients, we are going to have the greatest amount of energy, the most optimal recovery following exercise, and then also in general we're simply going to have the best health. The point of this is to understand that we have a simple tool for meeting nearly all of our most essential nutritional needs for exercise, and it can be done easily by incorporating what is in this slide here. All of these guidelines are great to follow, but understand that they do not have to be followed 24/7. It's very important to remember that. There are going to be plenty of life circumstances where perfect and even good nutrition is not even feasible. There are plenty of other problems and things to deal with in life. You don't have to always be super hard on yourself, and especially if you're working with athletes or people looking to make dietary changes. You're going to find that with time, nutrition flexibility is a key component that is required for long-term healthy eating and success with lifelong nutritional goals. By now, I am sure that you know how to put together a meal that is MyPlate friendly, like you know the back of your hand. But for the fun of it and just to get in a little extra practice, let's run through how we can go about putting together a MyPlate compatible meal. First, we have the grains. So for this, let's have a base of quinoa and beans. Now, of course, you can replace the quinoa with something that is a little bit less expensive and easier to find at the grocery store, like whole grain pasta or rice. But for the quinoa and beans, or for any quinoa alternate, both of these are starchy foods and primarily carbohydrates, so they're going to fill the grain section. But because of their nutrient density, we're also going to get a little extra protein, B vitamins, and minerals, especially iron, from these foods. For a little flavor and to take care of the vegetable section, let's add some bell peppers, onions, and carrots. And then let's throw on a little extra tomato sauce. These are great non-starchy vegetables, and these are going to add plenty of vitamins as well as a few minerals. If we mix in some ground beef, we add a little more flavor. This meets the protein section, providing us with a good amount of protein, as well as B vitamins that will assist with energy metabolism. On the side, and for fruits, we can add an apple or an orange or even a fruit salad. These fruits are generally going to provide fiber, vitamin C, and potentially a few other vitamins as well. For a meal like this, we don't necessarily need fruits from a nutritional standpoint, since we're already getting plenty of these nutrients from the vegetables, but they can add some flavor, and they could even serve as a delicious side or even a dessert. And finally, we can throw in a little extra cheese to this dish, or have a cup of yogurt or a cup of milk on the side to make sure that we get plenty of the bone building minerals and even some extra protein that comes with the dairy group. The meal from the last slide is great. It's phenomenal actually, but let's be honest, this isn't always super practical. Let's take a look at how we can apply this for simpler meals and maybe even give some easier ideas for people that are just starting to incorporate simple nutrition practices. Breakfast can be a tricky one, so let's turn your attention to the right side of the screen to see how we can my plate our B-fast. Look at the simplicity of it and also consider the low cost. With whole grain toast, eggs, and spinach, we can make a very nutrient dense meal that can be put together in a short amount of time. Add an apple or a banana on the side along with a glass of milk and you have a perfect meal. What's important to understand about breakfast is that it's not always practical to get those vegetables because they generally take a little bit extra time and most people do not crave vegetables for breakfast. Now of course you could add these to a sandwich like here, throw them in a smoothie, maybe fry them up with some potatoes, but generally vegetables aren't practical for breakfast. So if you skip out in the vegetable section for this meal, that's okay. But it's recommended that if you do, to make sure that at least for one, if not both of the other meals, that you're getting plenty of non-starchy vegetables. Now as you move over to lunch on the left side of the screen, you might be able to tell that I'm a big fan of sandwiches. A deli sandwich with tomato and romaine lettuce takes care of 1, the grains, 2, the vegetables, and 3, the protein section of my plate. A side of fruit and a cup of yogurt ensure that the rest of your needs are met. Now, a bigger or more active athlete may need a couple sandwiches and or a couple yogurts, but anybody of any size could have either of these meals together relatively quickly and for a pretty reasonable cost. Adequate hydration is another major component of optimal sports nutrition. Hydration ensures that adequate oxygen transport to the muscles, quick transport of sugars to fuel activity, and optimal muscle recovery occurs, and it will also work on removing waste that builds up in our cells. That's optimal hydration. When we're dehydrated, even just a little bit, this is going to directly affect our blood volume. It's going to decrease our blood because our blood is fluid. And lower blood volume is going to cause slower oxygen transport, slower nutrient transport, and a buildup of waste in the cells. Now, this negative effect does not require much dehydration. At just a 2% weight loss from fluid loss, exercise performance will be impaired and we're more likely to experience fatigue very, very quickly. And as dehydration progresses, overall body function decreases, and it can decrease drastically to the point of exhaustion, stroke, organ failure, and even death. And in my work as a clinical dietitian, I see many people come into the hospital with what's known as acute kidney injury, and this is very frequently caused by dehydration. A deficiency of water is the most significant deficiency of all the nutrients because its extreme effects can be seen quicker than the symptoms of the deficiency of any other nutrient. This will serve as a good segue into the next part of our lecture. We really must understand the most basic nutrition concepts as they relate to sports before we can delve into more in-depth nutritional topics. We must recognize the benefits of optimal balance of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and how to get plenty of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients by incorporating nutrient density, and it also helps to understand the whys behind these principles, as in what makes them useful and important. The in-depth nutritional topics are important, but we can't fully understand or appreciate them without this base of information. Some of these additional topics include endurance versus strength and power nutrition, weight management, ergogenic aids, and the differences in nutritional needs for men and women. So from here, we're going to discuss hydration, refueling, endurance versus strength nutrition principles, and then core concepts of nutrition ed. But again, it's important to understand that in order to understand these extra topics related to nutrition, we have to have that base understanding of micronutrients, macronutrients, and a lot that is in that overall mix. There is some science that goes into maintaining optimal hydration, but even researchers are finding that the simplest guidelines are often the most effective. They include sip frequently and don't chug, and 2, drink according to thirst. A very easy and accurate way to determine if you're optimally hydrated is to actually do something as simple and as gross as looking at the color of your urine. And if your urine color is anything like the shades that are next to 1, 2, or 3, that means that you're doing pretty good. If it's any darker than that, especially if it's on the lower end, it means that you should either start drinking during your activity, or if it's on the lower end, probably want to stop your activity temporarily and hydrate until you're feeling a little bit better. These guidelines are very simple, and really for them all that is required is that we pay attention to our body. More intensive and prolonged exercise can still incorporate the principles that are listed on the previous slide, but symptoms of electrolyte imbalance and low carbohydrate levels can quickly sneak up on us. So it's not a bad idea to have a scientifically based plan for when we or the athletes that we work with exercise in these prolonged conditions. And this includes, for exercise that lasts longer than 60 minutes, add electrolytes, and for exercise that lasts longer than 90 minutes, add carbohydrates. This doesn't mean that we should wait until 60 or 90 minutes to start throwing these things in, but we should make sure that any exercise that lasts longer than this, each of these different levels include those things. So if we're exercising for 75 minutes, 10-15 minutes in, it'd be a good idea to start sipping an electrolyte drink. And for carbohydrates and for exercise that lasts 2 hours or anything longer than 90 minutes, what we should do is probably get some carbohydrates in us every 15 to 30 minutes. And in that time frame, we should be getting about 25 grams of carbohydrates, which is the equivalent of about 100 calories of a pure carbohydrate food. To add electrolytes, drink a reputable sports drink, something other than regular Powerade or regular Gatorade. This could be something like HEED or Gatorade Endurance. And also in conditions where dehydration becomes more likely, such as when it's very hot or humid, be proactive and sip water a little bit more frequently than you normally would, and consider adding electrolytes for exercise that may be a little bit shorter than 60 minutes, and consider adding carbohydrates even for exercise that is 60 minutes to 90 minutes long. Refueling is another essential nutritional practice that allows us to exercise, perform, and even function optimally on a daily basis, especially over a prolonged period of time, which, as a person that's exercising or competing over the course of a season, they're going to require this consistency in order to obtain maximal physical adaptations and benefits. 2 hours after exercise is complete, in that window, we should be getting some carbohydrates and some protein. We do not have to have a ton of each during this time frame, but a little bit is critical to restoring energy levels and promoting muscle recovery and buildup. A good minimum is to consume 6 grams of protein and about 2 servings or 30 grams of a carbohydrate-rich food. We can get this very easily from simple items like a peanut butter and banana sandwich, a cup or 2 of yogurt, and a fruit/protein powder or peanut butter smoothie. Also, another goal of nutrition after exercise is to hydrate in order to replenish lost fluids. This is a very good time to do that because we're not going to have the jostling that's going inside of our stomach and intestines that we typically will have occurring during exercise. Like we mentioned before, the same basic nutrition principles are going to apply for all athletes regardless of size, sport, or exercise. However, there are some things that we briefly touched on throughout this course that apply to different types of athletes. This is an oversimplified review of the nutritional needs for each of these types of athletes, but we're going to go ahead with it anyways. Strained athletes will generally require a little bit more protein due to the high stress that's placed on their muscles from their activity, and they're also going to need very large amounts of carbohydrates to fuel their high intensity activity. Now, generally, the amount of protein that a strength-based athlete should consume is no more than 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. The way to find that out is to take your weight in pounds, divide that by 2.2, that gives you your weight in kilograms. Then you multiply this number by 2, and that gives you the maximum amount of protein that you should be getting each day. And that works out to be quite a bit of protein, but we often see strength athletes, not always, not even necessarily the majority of the time, but a good amount, we see them overemphasize protein, especially through supplements. And in doing so, there's not really any benefit. In fact, it's slightly detrimental. It's just going to cause that person to store a little bit extra body fat on. So although the protein needs are a little bit higher for the very high-end strength athletes, they're not extremely high, and not extremely higher compared to grams per kilogram of body weight, per pound of body weight. Endurance-based nutrition requires a focus on a large calorie intake, and where things can get interesting is when we look at their increased emphasis on dietary fat. We know that all athletes are going to require some carbohydrates, but endurance athletes can actually train their body to rely even more so on fats for fuel, decreasing their need to refuel as frequently during exercise. We briefly touched on this during our class, but there's a lot of new and exciting research on this topic that you can explore further on your own. Something very exciting about sports nutrition is that it's a field that's continually growing, and we can see this economically. We discussed this in one of our previous chapters, but the rate of growth of sports nutrition, even the rate of growth, is increasing. The growth is certainly increasing, but the amount, or the rate that it's increasing at, is still going up. So we expect a greater appreciation of nutrition in athletic performance, especially at the high-end collegiate level and certainly at the professional level. We talked about some of the goals and ideal outcomes that would occur on your end after taking this class at the very beginning of this lecture, but the outcomes that we discuss here are important as well, and more so related to some of the topics that we covered later on in the semester that review sports nutrition in a little bit greater of depth. So as we get closer to the close of this lecture, I figure this would be a good time to go over these. Number one, there is a ton of bad information out there that's related to nutrition. Going forward, recognize that not all nutrition information is accurate. Generally, nutrition advice and guidelines should be based on the scientific principles that have been discussed in this course. There may be additional practices not covered in this course that are okay to incorporate, but anything that strongly contradicts what we have reviewed is probably inaccurate and, even worse, potentially dangerous. Number two, nutrition is a little bit more than just about health. We can incorporate certain practices that boost our performance and speed up our recovery, and these practices are generally simple. Balance your meals, eat nutrient-dense foods, get a variety of different foods, and control the portions of the bad foods. Also, hydrate regularly and appropriately, and consume adequate protein and carbohydrates after exercise in order to promote optimal recovery. And three, finally, if relaying information to people that you're working with, make sure that this information is relayed effectively. This means focusing as much, if not more so, on the delivery as you focus on the actual content. Meet the needs of your audience always and give them information that is unique to their lifestyle, sport, challenges, and needs.